Reverend Anthony Rogers received an AA degree in Christian thought from Christ College in Lynchburg, Virginia, and a divinity degree from Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. He's an ordained pastor in the Presbyterian Church of America and serves as a regional director for Metanoia Prison Ministries in South Carolina. He has published articles in numerous theological journals, is a co-author of the book Our God is Triune, and runs a YouTube channel under his name. Let's welcome Reverend Anthony Rogers.
This is the first in 2 lectures on the issue of the Quran's clarity, its perspicuity. If you've read the Quran, you know that it claims repeatedly throughout, from beginning to end, to be a clear book. In this first lecture, I'm going to address that. I'm going to show you the claim. You're going to hear it so often that you're going to get tired of hearing it, but that's important. It's so that you can see the weight of the problem that I'm going to reveal. The Quran claims to be a clear book. That is the persistent claim up until a critical moment when the claim was exposed for the fraud that it is. But we're not going to get to that until the second lecture. There is going to be a natural conclusion to this one, so we are going somewhere in this one. But I'm really interested in encouraging you to come back for the next one. This is all set up. Okay? This is getting you prepped to understand what I'm going to talk about in part 2, which is what this lecture gets its title from, A Mother of a Problem. That's an old, outdated title. But all right, this is a quote from Ali Dashti. That's not my typographical errors on there. There's not a lot of standardization when it comes to transliterating Arabic words, and the transliterations in Dashti are pretty peculiar, even by the standards that don't exist for transliteration. But he says in his book, Muhammad saw the Quran as the warrant for his prophethood. Muslim scholars are unanimous in regarding the Quran as Muhammad's miracle. There's been much debate, however, on the question whether the Quran is miraculous in respect of its eloquence or of its subject matter, or of both. In general, the Muslim scholars consider it to be miraculous in both respects. That is, miraculous in terms of its eloquence and miraculous in terms of its revealed subject matter. In general, the Muslim scholars consider it to be miraculous in both respects. This opinion clearly, he says, stems from zealous faith rather than impartial study. Now, the issue that I'm talking about, the Quran's claim to clarity, falls into that first category. The idea that it's inimitable, its eloquence is incapable of being imitated. It can't be surpassed by anything that can be produced by man or jinn or any collection of them. So according to Muslims, this is a central claim. This is, in fact, when you look at the Quran, you're looking for evidence. You want to know what's the evidence for Muhammad's prophethood. This is one of the things that Muslims should be bringing up. They don't often bring this up, not as often as I think the Quran suggests they should, but this is one of its claims to fame, that it's eloquent. Dashti goes on to say, non-Muslim scholars have found, you won't find this surprising, numerous grounds for questioning the intelligibility and eloquence of the Quran, and Muslim scholars have concurred insofar as they have found that the Quran needs interpretation. All right, but let's look at the claim before showing you how false this claim is. So first of all, the Quran claims to be a clear book. Here's Surah 11:1. This is the first of a long list of passages in the Quran that claim to be clear. Notice what it says. Alif, Lam, Ra. Those are letters of the Arabic alphabet. Then it goes on to say, this is a book whose verses are well perfected and then fully explained. It's from the one who is all wise, all aware. Now, by the way, you see the name after that, that indicates the translator. That's a relatively modern, last several years, translation of the Quran done by a man, a cleric named Mustafa Khattab. He calls his Quran the Clear Quran. So the very title that he gives to the book shows you that he thinks the Quran is fundamentally clear. This would be one of the passages that he would look to in order to come to that conclusion. But notice it says a book whose verses are well perfected. So it's claiming here that the verses that make up the Quran are clear. Okay, keep that in mind. Here's another translation. This is Muhammad Asad. It brings out something of the nuance better. It says, Alif Lam Ra, a divine writ is this with messages that have been made clear in and by themselves and have been distinctly spelled out as well, bestowed upon you out of the grace of one who is wise, all aware. So same idea, just like we have in our English translations of the Bible, there's different ways you can render something to express the underlying original. Well, you have that going on in these different translations of the Quran. If a Muslim ever tells you, you have all these different translations of the Bible, that's no different than what you find in Islam. They have different translations. Languages change over time. And so if you're going to accurately express what is being stated in an ancient document, it's relevant, and there's nothing illicit about it, to give an updated English or whatever language you're talking about, giving an updated version of that. So again, here you have just different ways that Muslims have translated this. Here is the Study Quran and its rendering of this. It says a book whose signs, so the Arabic word that's translated verses means signs. And so that's just a title or name that's given to various verses of the Quran. And so there's no significant difference indicated by this. When it says a book whose signs, it means a book whose verses have been determined, then expounded. The reason other translations say clear is because the idea of the verse being determined, meaning it has a fixed, definite meaning. That's the idea of clarity. So some will say fixed meaning, determined meaning, clear, and so forth. Here's what the Study Quran says in a footnote. The Quran's signs are determined, or that the Quran signs are determined, signifies that the Quran is clear and unambiguous in meaning. So this is not just me. I mean, I think it's obvious. When you read the verse, it's claiming to be clear. You didn't need me to say it. You could have read it. You didn't need the Study Quran. But often Muslims push back against almost anything you say about the Quran. So it's always helpful, no matter how clear something is, to bring in at least somewhat Islamic authority to sort of back your play. So here's the Study Quran done by a number of Muslim scholars saying the Quran is clear and unambiguous in meaning. Notice, this is a general statement. It's saying this is what's true of the Quran. This is its fundamental character. That's just one verse. Here's Surah 12, Alif Lam Ra. There's those letters again. These are the verses of the clear book. So now notice in the previous verse, it says the verses are clear. Now it says the verses of the clear book. So it's making a claim about the book as a whole, right? I don't know how many of you have taken logic, but there's a number of ways that people will sometimes fallaciously reason that's known as a composition fallacy. And so, for example, if I say this wall is made of bricks and each brick weighs a pound, therefore the wall weighs a pound. Right? Would that make sense? No, you'd say that doesn't make sense. The whole isn't necessarily equal to the parts. And so the point that I'm trying to get you to see is that the Quran doesn't just claim that its verses are clear, it claims the book is clear. It doesn't just claim that the book is clear, it claims the verses are clear. It's tackling this from all directions. You are intended to understand that this book is thoroughly clear. And that's what you'd expect, right? If it's a message from God and it's intended to be guidance, well, then it should be clear. It can't practically function as guidance if it's not clear. You might still say that it's authoritative and inerrant, but if it's not clear, it can't really function very well in that capacity as guidance. So again, the Quran claims to be clear. Its verses are clear. The book is clear. And notice we've revealed it in an Arabic Quran so that you may understand. Again, that's the purpose of revelation. If it's not revealing, then it's not revelation. If it's concealing, then, and the objection here is not that there are some things the Quran doesn't tell us about, like when the final day is. The Quran is clear that Allah hasn't revealed the final day, right? So don't get those two things confused. As Christians, we don't think the Bible tells us that, but we think that what the Bible tells us is fundamentally clear. We don't make the claim that every single verse of the Bible is clear, right? We do think that everything is potentially understandable. It's in the main clear. Peter said of Paul's writings, there are some things in Paul's writings that are hard to understand. Notice he doesn't say impossible, nor does he say everything in Paul's writings. It's some things are hard, and they're hard, not impossible to understand. Okay, but the Quran is making this claim that it is clear through and through. This is part of its claim to fame. Christians and Jews differ with one another, but this Quran comes to provide clarity. It dispels doubts. It chases away the clouds. So this Quran surpasses anything else. It's clear. Okay, here's another rendering of that, the clear, lucid book, so that you may understand. Here's Surah 15. Okay, we've only looked at 2 surahs. I told you I'm going to look at several, and I'm only going to look at a third of the references in the Quran to the Quran's clarity. But again, you need to feel that this is the claim. This is what Muhammad was telling his people was true of the Quran, all throughout his quote-unquote prophetic career. These are the ayats of revelation of a Quran that makes things clear. That's Yusuf Ali's translation. Here's Shabir Ahmed, Alif Lam Ra, Allah, Alim, the knower. Notice he's kind of giving you at least his idea of what those letters stand for. Razik, the provider. These are messages of revelation, a discourse clear in itself and clearly showing the truth. This is Quran, a plain reading and a revelation that explains itself. So here you're being taught that the Quran is self-interpreting. Its clarity is, in part at least, the case because it interprets itself. And so you can turn to one passage of the Quran to shed light on another passage. And so what you'd have to say if you're putting all this together is these verses are clear already by themselves, but these verses are so harmonious that they can shed further light. So even if a room is lit up, for example, you could always introduce more light into it and it would just become all the clearer in the room, right? Doesn't mean that the room was not clearly lit up before, but you see how this notion is being just hammered. Okay? The Quran is clear. It makes things clear. It's explained in detail. Here's Surah 24. This is a chapter which we have sent down and decreed its commands, and in which we have sent down clear verses in order that you may ponder. So notice there's a purpose clause. This is the reason why it's clear, so that you may ponder it. Okay? You are able to process this. You're able to take it in and roll it over in your mind and benefit from it. It is guidance. It is light. Here's Hussein's translation. This is a surat that we sent down with laws to be obeyed, and we revealed clear verses so you will pay attention. Again, purpose clause. It's clear so that it can function as revealed guidance. Here's Surah 27. These are verses from the Quran, and it is a clear book offered for guidance and as good news for believers. Now, I'll pause here for a moment and just say something about the repetitive nature of this. Sometimes when there's a point to being repetitive, it's not always a sign of a problem, but sometimes it is. I remember years ago, I lived in Las Vegas, and there was this family down the street that was very dysfunctional. I don't know all the details, but one example of, well, a couple of examples of just how dysfunctional is one time I walked outside because I heard all this noise, and I wanted to know what was going on, and the 15-year-old son was taking a bat to his father's truck. So they were having some kind of a problem, and he's beating up his father's truck. And I thought, wow, that's That's, I mean, I was a problem child. I did all sorts of things, but my parents were off limits, right? That just never even entered my mind. So I knew there was real problems here. Another example is my wife is a believing Jewish lady, and they found out she was Jewish one day, and she came outside and there's all this anti-Jewish stuff on her car. And so we had to find a way to deal with that sort of thing. But they're very dysfunctional. And I was always very good to their kids. They had younger kids, and I would stay out there and watch their kids sometimes on the block. It was a cul-de-sac. Well, one time a cop was coming down the street doing a routine patrol, and the little girl that was from that house down the street, she suddenly blurted out, "My daddy didn't do anything. My daddy didn't do anything." And I thought, oh, I mean, it broke my heart. I'm thinking, she's used to the police coming to her house. That's what she's telling you. And she's immediately responding because this is her experience. Well, in the Quran, one of the things you see over and over again that's got to be telling like that is when Muhammad says things like, you're not possessed. He's saying that Allah is revealing to him, you're not a madman. You're not a poet. You're not possessed. Repeatedly, you're not a madman. Like, what would you think if I was up here and every 2 minutes I said, by the way, I am not possessed, right? I want to make this clear just in case you were confused, right? You'd start to think what's that all about? Well, you get the impression that maybe Muhammad's trying to really sell this point, like he's not so sure he's coming across clearly. So he's got to tell you, this is what you're supposed to think. And if you don't think it's clear, there's something wrong with you, right? So I kind of get that impression when I go through this, that this is pushing just a little too hard. Why do we have to say this so often? Here is Rodwell's translation of this. Ta-sin, again, these are Arabic letters. These are the signs, verses of the Quran, and of the lucid book, guidance and glad tidings to the believer. Notice a lot of the times, these statements about the Quran's clarity appear at the beginning of chapters. So again, it's like, okay, you're going to hear some stuff that sounds a little like gobbledygook, but let me tell you in advance, it's not. So that way you just know. You know when you get to the gobbledygook that it's really not gobbledygook. It's clear. Here's 28, again, beginning of this surah of the Quran. Tasin Mim, or Mim. These are the verses of the clear and clarifying book. By the way, notice how he's clarifying it. He doesn't want you to think just that it's clear, but that it clarifies. So he puts that in parentheses. The parentheses are not part of the verse. He might be suggesting that the nuance or whatever, there's more to it in Arabic, so he needs more English words to bring out the full implications of it. But in any case, I remember I talked to a Muslim once, and he's so used to English translations of the Quran adding to it to make it intelligible. It's really what they're doing. I read my first introduction to reading the Quran was Yusuf Ali's translation, and Yusuf Ali had a very good command of English. So I actually enjoyed it from that perspective, in the sense that I thought in his notes, he was a very good writer. But I learned over time, wait a minute, the Quran sounds better than it really is. I didn't believe the message of it. At no point did I think this was a beautiful message, but I thought that the English diction and all that was really good. And I started realizing he's really helping the Quran out here, because it just doesn't read like that. And in any case, this Muslim that this was Sami Zatri. Jay might remember him. He was a Islamic debater back in the day. It's amazing how many of those guys are no longer around. We're all still around, but these guys eventually fall off the scene. Many of the people that are still doing dawah today among Muslims weren't around before. Some of them are, but it's something gets to them eventually, right? Where they seem to run out of steam. We don't seem to be holding up as well, and they just fall off the map. But anyways, Sami Zatri one time, he thought, because he looked at a Bible and he saw parentheses around something, he thought that was an indication that that's not really in the text. And so he made this whole argument based on this. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, what is he? At first I didn't understand what he was saying, because it didn't even occur to me to think that way. When a translation puts parentheses around something, as long as it's not the Amplified Bible or something, it's not an indication that this is not part of the text. It's just saying it's parenthetical in the writer's what he's communicating. It's parenthetical, so they indicate that. Paul has parenthetical remarks to make often. But in John's gospel, I think is the one that this guy was using. It says, in the beginning, or it says, the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And then in parentheses, it says, we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. But that's part of the text. In any case, when you see this sort of thing in Quran translations, they're adding to the Quran. If you see the word Muhammad, for example, most of the time it's not actually there in the Arabic text. It's only in the Quran 4 times. But in some translations, it's there all the time. And you think, wow, Muhammad's mentioned a lot in the Quran, but he's not. All right, so the book that clarifies, Surah 41, Ha Mim, again, some Arabic letters, a revelation from God, the most gracious, the most merciful, a book whose revelations are well expounded, an Arabic Quran for people who possess knowledge. So it's a clear book. You guys getting the point? It's a clear book. It clarifies. It's exhaustively detailed. Its verses are definite, determined. Its verses are clear. The book is clear. Muhammad really wants you to know that. If you're not getting that message, then either the Quran's not clear or you are dull. Okay, here is Safi Kaska's translation. Meme, revelations have come down to you from the merciful to all, the mercy giver, a book whose verses have been made clear, an Arabic Quran for people who know. That sounds a little odd to me. It's almost like the verses were not clear at some point and he made them clear. I mean, I'm not suggesting you run with that. It sounds a little odd to me. But anyways, this is Yusuf Ali's footnote on this particular verse. Here, the Quran is described mainly with reference to its subject matter. 1, it brings the message of grace and mercy. 2, it's not merely a book of dark sayings, but everything. So notice, Yusuf Ali, he's a Muslim. It's not just me. It's not just you. If you're thinking the Quran is claiming to be clear, exhaustively clear, clear through and through, Yusuf Ali says this. That's what the Quran is saying. It's really saying that. Not merely a book of dark sayings, but everything is explained clearly from various points of view. It is in Arabic, number 3, the language of the people among whom it was first promulgated, and therefore easily intelligible to them if they take the trouble to understand. Now, I think that last bit is challengeable. Why do they have to take the trouble to understand? The whole point is it's so clear, you have to be adult to miss its meaning. I don't think he meant to, I think there he's just sort of hedging. He's thinking, well, some people are going to just have this jaundiced view of the Quran and not give it a chance. But the Quran itself is claiming to be clear, so clear that you can read and understand it. Remember the book of the 12 in there, it says that God is going to reveal himself and the person who runs can read. The idea is it's so clear that you don't have to be sitting there focused on the text. You could run and be reading it and understand what it's saying. Well, that's kind of the idea that the Quran is communicating. It is clear. Here's Surah 6:55. Thus do we make distinct the communications, and so that the way of the guilty may become clear. Abdul Hay's translation, we explain in detail the verses so that the way of the sinners becomes clear. Here's Surah 7. I'm going to skip part of this. Here it says, our fathers started the practice of shirk and we just followed. So it's quoting the pagans. Being their descendants, will you then destroy us on account of following the sin committed by those wrongdoers? Thus do we spell out our revelation so that you might return to the right way. So Allah is telling you what the pagans were saying and why the pagans don't have a legitimate case. They're complaining, they're suggesting that on the day of judgment, they're going to be able to raise as an objection, we didn't know, our fathers taught us this. And so Allah rebuts this claim, allegedly. And so Allah is claiming here that he's so clear that you have no excuse. I am so clear, thus do we spell out our revelation so that you might return to the right way. Surah 16:89, and on the day when we will raise up in every people a witness against them from among themselves and bring you, often when the Quran says you, it's talking to Muhammad. In the Arabic, it would be more readily understandable because it could be either singular or plural, right? We don't have that in English unless you're in the South, y'all, right? But you in Arabic can be singular or plural, and often it's in the singular, and in those cases, it typically is talking to Muhammad. So it's saying, we're going to bring you as a witness against these, and we have revealed the book to you, explaining clearly everything, and a guidance and mercy and good news for those who submit. So again, you see, these two things go together. I'm not critical of this. When the Quran says this sort of thing, it's the kind of thing I would expect. If God's going to reveal guidance, it should be clear. That's the point. What's the point of giving a book that you can't understand? Even if it's true, exhaustively true, if you can't understand it, it's worthless to you. Sarwar's translation says, the book which clarifies all matters. It is a guide, a mercy, and glad news to the Muslims. Here's Surah 16, same surah. In Bakhyar's translation, say, the hallowed spirit sent it down from thy Lord with the truth to make firm those who believed in his guidance and good tidings to the ones who submit to God. And certainly we know that they say, it is only a mortal who teaches him. The tongue of him whom they hint at is non-Arab, while this is in a clear Arabic tongue. So what Muhammad's doing here is he's responding to the claim that he's getting help from somebody. The reason the Quran is such a great book, again, I mean, it's like you got to buy into their claim in order for the argument to even work, right? Muslims will constantly say, you know, nobody could have helped him. How do you explain him writing this great book if he wasn't being inspired by God? And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Who told you it was a great book? Well, Muhammad does, right? Repeatedly, he's telling you this book is so great. I'm thinking, I never got that impression, right? I never thought it was a great book in terms of its content. My comments before were about Yusuf Ali's translational abilities, not about, in his command of the English language, not about the Quran itself. But anyway, so the Quran claims to be clear. This is Surah 17:12. I'll start speeding this up here. I think you're getting the point, right? 17:12 says, we have made everything clear in detail. And notice how many different translations I'm using here. Okay, that's another way I've been driving this point. It's not just some idiosyncratic translation. It's found in numerous passages of the Quran. In fact, as I skip ahead here, got 15 minutes, you'll notice there's a bunch of other verses, plain, clear. Here are, at least as I found them, the passages of the Quran that claim that it's clear. Here are the ones that I quoted. Notice that's only about a third of them. So as tedious as that felt, I even ran through really quickly. We didn't even read them, a few of the ones that are marked in red here. So do you think the Quran claims to be a clear book? Is that part of the Quran's claim? Am I misrepresenting anything? And I've quoted Muslims who've said this. It's a clear book. Its verses are clear. Note this as well. As you know, traditionally, the claim is, and you got to listen to Jay so that you know that right now what I'm doing is I'm just talking about the standard claim. This is the standard claim of people. But once you realize that the historical stuff is all in doubt, this is all neither here nor there in a sense. But running with their claim, the idea is that there are some surahs that are revealed during Muhammad's Meccan period and some that are revealed during his Medinan period. So the time when he was in Mecca, some surahs were revealed. The time when he was in Medina, other surahs were revealed. This claim that the Quran is clear is found in both time periods. Okay, so it's made frequently. It's made, I think, clearly. That much is clear in the Quran, that it claims to be a clear book. And it's found all throughout Muhammad's prophetic, quote unquote, prophetic career. Meccan and Medinan. So it's not just something that you can relegate to a particular time period. Maybe Allah was unclear at one point, but got a better command of Arabic, got more used to speaking to people, got over his butterflies or whatever, and started speaking more clearly. You can't, there's no outs here. It's claimed to be clear, runs through the entire Quran. There's going to be more significance of that in the second lecture. But let's start asking some questions about this. Here's everybody's favorite guy who likes to poke holes in the standard narrative. But here's his book. This is known as Ulum al-Quran, and that means the sciences of the Quran. So there are various, we could talk about the sciences of the Bible, and that would just be like the various disciplines relevant to knowing the Bible, right? The sciences of the Bible would be like, you know, knowing its languages, knowing hermeneutics, knowing something about historical context, right? So there's this whole area in Islamic studies called Ulum al-Quran. This is Yasser Qadhi's introduction to this area of study. And for a while, it was, and I still think it's pretty much the case today, that it's one of the few that are out there, and it's probably still the best in the English language. There's another book written by Ahmed van Denver that's shorter, which is also good. Those are the two standard ones that I think most Muslims, that they're dependent on English, that they're using. So this is not just me picking on Yasser Qadhi, although I do get some pleasure out of that. I mean that in the best possible way. But Yasser Qadhi was a guy that was, one of the reasons I say that is because he was pushing certain things that we now know he knew were not true, such as the claim that the Quran has never been changed and all of that. He knew that was not true the entire time before he blew the lid off of it on accident. Okay, so that, for that reason, I kind of think sometimes if I keep pounding on somebody, I think I kind of start to feel bad, as wrong as they are. But Yasser Qadhi, I constantly come back to my senses and think, wait a minute, this guy was lying to people for decades. I don't feel bad anymore. Well, here's what he says in his book. Was that fancy? I did that on accident. I one day was tinkering with my PowerPoint but anyways, he says here in his book, in these verses, he gives you a couple of verses, one of them I quoted, Allah is saying that the whole Quran is clear. Notice this, the whole Quran is clear, is a clear, perfect book which acts as a criterion between good and evil. Imam al-Tabari said Allah has protected his verses from any evil entering it, or any flaw, or any falsehood. Then he set it forth with commands and prohibitions and so forth. But here's Yasser Qadhi, everybody's favorite holes in the narrative guy. The Quran is clear. It is clear. It's entirely clear. Okay, so again, not just me, not some idiosyncratic translation. It's not just one verse, many verses, many translations, one Islamic scholar after another. Well, what are some problems with this? Now, this, again, I'm just setting this up. The big problem's coming. You have to come back for that. You have to come back for part two. Some of this is old hat. Some of you are probably sitting here, I knew some of that, right? Or most of that. Again, this is setup, but let's look at some problems, some initial problems with this. Now, this should speak volumes to you. What I'm going to show you are problems just with the verses that I quoted saying that the Quran is clear. Imagine what would be true if I was looking at anywhere I wanted in the Quran. Okay, so I'm tying my hands behind my back here. I'm limiting myself. How well does the Quran hold up? Here's one of the passages. Notice this. Maybe you were already wondering it. It starts off Alif Lam Ra, and then it says the Quran is clear. What does that mean? Alif Lam Ra. Any ideas? Allahu Alam, right? Allah knows best. Allah knows best. That means only Allah knows. You don't know. Okay? Here's the study Quran on Surah 11. It says that, notice the black part, that the Quran signs are determined, signifies that the Quran is clear and unambiguous in meaning. Notice the same footnote. The Arabic letters Alif, Lam, and Ra are among the separated letters found at the beginning of 29 surahs, whose ultimate meaning, most commentators attest, is known only to God. In the same verse that it claims to be entirely clear, it's not clear. Now, maybe I'm being a little too hard on the book here, but again, think about it. The book claims to be clear. It's pounding that into your head. I don't think this is me being, too picky-Annie and so forth. But this isn't the only problem. But let's not move past this too quickly. Here's Yusuf Ali. He says certain surahs have certain initials prefixed to them, which are called the abbreviated letters. A number of conjectures have been made as to their meaning. Opinions are divided as to the exact meaning of each particular letter or combination of letters, and it's agreed that only Allah knows their exact meanings. Only Allah, in this exhaustively clear and detailed book, knows the meaning of these letters. What's the point of that? I don't get it. Why is he giving a revelation, parts of which you can't even understand? Why not just say, hey, there's some stuff I could have said that you wouldn't have gotten? I mean, that would have been at least more revealing. Right? But here we have stuff that's of no use to us, other than, well, there is some use to it, but this is because of the true God's providence, right? The use of it is that I get to now talk about this, right, and poke holes in it. So the true God is using the foolishness of men, for our, in some sense, entertainment. And obviously, there's a greater purpose for this. We can use this to talk to them. But in any case, I don't see the point, if it's from Allah, why he would reveal anything that doesn't have an intelligible meaning and use. So here's Yasir Qadhi again. I know you can't read that. I certainly can't. But you'll notice there's a lot of red marks there, right? What that is, this is the same book of Yasir Qadhi where it says the entire Quran is clear, talking about these letters. Those little red marks are around numbers. There's 12 numbers there. They represent 12 different guesses that people have come up with on the meaning of these letters. I didn't read all the passages that have these unexplained letters in them, only some of them. But here's Yasir Qadhi, 12 different interpretations. And then he says at the end, you can't see it, but he says, at some point, maybe it's not on this page, but he says that these are just the most commonly cited 12. So there's more. How clear is the Quran now? Well, it's not as clear as you might have thought, but maybe the rest of the verse is clear. All right. Notice this. I call this the one. It says Alif Lam Ra, same verse. This is a book whose verses are well perfected and then fully explained. It is from the one who is all wise, all aware. Now, one of the things you know, if you've done anything with Muslims, is they claim that their religion is a religion of absolute monotheism. Allah is absolutely one. So you don't even hesitate. When I read it earlier, none of you probably took any notice of that. I do. Every time I read it, I think, wow, here he is again, saying he's one. But what about some of these other, notice it's from the one, by the way. Now this is what I call the we. Here's one of the very next chapter, Alif Lam Ra. These are the verses of the clear book. We have revealed it, an Arabic Quran. Who's this we character? Now, I'll bet you, I already know what you guys are going to say. If I ask you, why does Allah say we in the Quran? What do Muslims say? The plural of majesty, right? Now, the Quran explains itself, though, doesn't it? Where does the Quran explain this? Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. I should have made you wait a little bit, but I only have 5 minutes, and I got a lot more to say. So the Quran never explains this. And I can tell you, this is going to be huge next lecture. I can already tell you there is no such thing as a plural of majesty in Arabic. And this on the basis of Islamic authority. M.A.S. Abdel Halim wrote an article called Iltifat in a Islamic journal. And in it, he points out that at the time of the Prophet, this is an exact quote, that at the time of the Prophet, there was no such thing as a plural of majesty in Arabic. And so if there is such a thing as a plural of majesty in the Quran, then it was introduced with the Quran and with Muhammad, which means the Quran would have to explain it. It can't just be part of their cultural context. I'll give you a little hint, by the way, that there's a problem here, that it can't be a plural of majesty that goes beyond this. One of the questions that the Christians of Najran asked Muhammad when they heard about him, they heard revelations from him, from his followers. They went up and asked Muhammad a question about this. Why does Allah speak in the plural? Understand, these are Arab Christians. Arabic is their native language. Why are they asking Muhammad if it's just a plural of majesty and we have that in our language and we all understand that? They don't think it's a plural of majesty. They say this has to mean something, and that's not an option. So here's these clear verses. We don't know what these letters mean. We've got this same being claiming to be the one and then speaking as a plural, a we, and that's not explained. Is this irrelevant to something fundamental to the Quran? Maybe you could just write it off. Oh, that's not all that important. It's like we might treat, tying our shoes, or, what does it matter if you do it one way or another? This strikes at the very fundamental core of the Quran and its teachings. Here's Haq's translation, Shakir's translation. Oh, these are other passages, by the way, other passages about the Quran being clear. Again, we have revealed it. We have sent it down. So it's not, you can't just say the we is angels and others. The Quran is from Allah. He's its origin, its source. The person who speaks in the we is somehow to be identified with Allah. All right, so that's a problem. Hey, we have made the sign of the night dark, and we have made the sign of the day bright, so that you may look for your Lord's bounty, and that we may work out the number of years and do reckoning, and we have made everything clear in detail. Okay, so there's we again. Okay, I'm gonna skip past this. Now watch this. Allah's supposed to be the speaker in the Quran, right? So sometimes he speaks as the one, he speaks as I, he speaks as me, then he turns around and speaks as we, us, our. As Christians, this makes perfect sense, by the way. My final view on this, I have a 50-page article on this, is that Muhammad picked up from Jews and Christians like crumbs off a table. I mean, he didn't know what he was doing, he was borrowing. He picked up this idea of God speaking in the plural, but had no idea of what that meant biblically. And then when somebody finally asked him about it, he was like, oh, I didn't think about that. More on that. But notice, we've made the sign of the night dark, and we made the sign of the day bright, so that you might look for your Lord's bounty. Notice he's speaking about Allah in the third person. Now, you might think, well, that's not unacceptable. You can speak of yourself in the third person. It gets kind of awkward when you do it often, but there can, even in that scenario, be a reason for it. Jesus, for example, speaks of the Son of Man. It's usually in the third person. There's a reason for that when Jesus does it. But in the Quran, this becomes very unusual. And I haven't even brought up the most difficult to explain verses, because I'm trying to use the clear ones. But what happens is Allah will switch back and forth between speaking in the singular, speaking in the plural, speaking about himself directly in the first person, then speaking about himself in the third person. So notice here, O prophet, remind mankind about the incident. Who's speaking here? Allah. Remind mankind about the incident when your Lord, well, who's Allah talking about here? Who's your Lord, right? This kind of thing happens all throughout the Quran. Muslims have a whole name for it. It's supposed to be like, you know, when doctors give names to things and it sounds like they know what they're talking about, and a lot of times they don't, and they'll tell you, this is the name we give to this thing we don't understand, right? But it sounds, because you've given it a name, like you understand it. Well, Muslims call this iltifat. It's when the Quran banters back and forth between first and third person. And you're trying to keep track of this, and you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought Allah was talking here. Now it sounds like somebody else is talking. Sometimes it's almost as if it starts to sound more like Muhammad's talking, because the thing that's being stated is not the sort of thing Allah should be saying. Okay. Here's Farouk. This is Surah 7. Our forefathers, well, let's skip this one. I've got 0 minutes left. Say, the hallowed spirit sent it down from thy Lord. Okay. Well, this brings us to the end. So I did very good on my timing. So you've got at least an idea of how this claim is made in the Quran and some challenges to the claim. But the problem is 1,000 times worse than what I just showed you. Okay, so understand, this is useful. This is useful all by itself. But the problem is 1,000 times worse. So I hope you'll come back and hear that.